This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Audible. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Friday, August 21st, 2020, and my guest is the awesome Matt Miller of ZDNet. Hi, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing great, Miriam. How are you?
I'm pretty awesome. It's Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra review week.
That's right.
You reviewed it.
I did.
I reviewed it.
And as an S Pen fan, I'm excited. I'm excited about it.
It's going to be fun. So, I'm thinking I want to get you started. Like, I'm going to link to your review in the show notes, obviously. But would you tell the audience, in a nutshell, what's your take?
So, I'm a huge Note fan. I think I started with the Note 3. And every year since then, I've purchased the Note. The Note 10 to me wasn't a huge upgrade from the Note 9. I know Larry Dignan at ZDNet is also a Note user. He skipped the Note 10. It just wasn't offering enough. After, what do we had, 2 or 3 weeks with the Note 20 Ultra, I think it is the upgrade that Note 9 users have been looking for, in my opinion. I say you could go ahead and skip the Note 10, no problem, but the Note 20 Ultra, the Ultra version, we'll talk about that, I suppose, a little bit, compared to the Note 20. The Note 20 Ultra is the one to get.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting you bring up the Note 10 because I felt like the Note 10 was a really nice cosmetic upgrade. Like, I really felt it looked the part. Like, I felt the Note 9 and the 8 kind of had a little frumpy in the back because of like that, fingerprint scanner and the heart rate sensor, and it wasn't quite put together. And I felt like the Note 10 was a really sleek and elegant phone. And I feel like the Note 20, even the regular 20, wow. Like, I really think design-wise, this is the pinnacle of Samsung design. This is absolutely true a Samsung phone, you know?
Absolutely. And I'm a huge fan of the matte finish glass on the back. We see that a lot with OnePlus. I love the matte finish glass because I cannot stand glossy fingerprints everywhere on my phones. Yeah. I just love the feel of it, so.
Oh, I'm with you 100%. I think that the design is it's not the most important thing for us, right? Because especially the Note user is a power user. You're more concerned about this S Pen, you're more concerned about other things. But I feel like if it's going to be Samsung's flagship, the S20 didn't deliver this year. It doesn't look very interesting, It's fine.
Yeah, and it's funny, I tried the S20 Ultra. I still have a review unit around, but I could never adopt it as my daily driver. It seemed too chunky to me, too big. Yeah. It didn't offer enough. And then, of course, as you mentioned in your review on Gear Diary, the cameras, I think the Note 20 Ultra is a great improvement over the S20 Ultra. Because I had so many problems. I know they've issued some software updates since then, and they fixed some things, but it's still, the Note 20 Ultra is the camera that I wish we would have had in the S20.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like, I feel like, okay, you have to cut them some slack, at least on the Ultra, the S20 Ultra, about having tried something new, right? It's first time for them doing like that 108 megapixel sensor, which it's a beast to handle this level of compute. And first time doing a periscope folded lens, right? I'm willing to give them credit for that. And it makes sense that the Note 20 Ultra would, kind of as an iteration fix a lot of these issues like autofocus. And I think there's something really special about that 108 megapixel sensor and the fact that the optics that they had to create for it give it such a shallow depth of field. Mm-hmm. It's really delicious to shoot with if you like that sort of look, because you don't need to use portrait mode. Like, if you get close to a subject, you immediately get that creamy, totally natural optical bokeh in the background. It's just lovely.
The one thing I used to use my Note 10 though for a lot was macro shots. And as you mentioned in your review, you've got to approach macro shots a little bit differently with the S20 and the Note 20. But once you figure out how to do it properly, then you're back to,
it's interesting too, because it's hit and miss. Like, half the time it'll actually give you that advice, using that scene optimizer, which tells you like how to use your phone. So half the time it figures out you're trying to take a close up and it goes, pull back and then it switches on, like you can tell it switches automatically to 2x for you. And other times, and you can turn that off by the way, but other times it would just sit there and I'd have to like, if I didn't know, if I was a normal user, I wouldn't know. And so I would have to like manually pull back and hit the 2x to get that. And to be clear, obviously for the listeners, anything up to 5x on the Note 20 Ultra in terms of zoom is done by the main lens, right? So what you're doing is at that point, it's like a compromise between the pixel binning that it's doing for low light at 3x3 and the, using every pixel individually. So the more you zoom, the less binning there is, the more data you lose, I guess, in terms of like the more noise you gain and the more pixels you throw out, I guess. And so that's one of the side effects of you don't have a 2x or a 3x telephoto and you have a 5x. So,
and continue a little bit on the hardware is once you try a 120 hertz display,
oh my god,
you can't go back.
I know
it's so hard to go back to 60 hertz again. So I love that on the Note 20 Ultra.
I mean, I will take refresh rate over resolution every time.
Absolutely.
And I have to say that this is the first time, because I don't have a choice, because in the past I'm kind of hardcore, like on the OnePlus and other phones, I always peg it to 120 or 90. Like I say, you stay at that frequency. I want you to refresh fast all the time. And now I've decided that maybe the adaptive option, if it's available on another phone, like for example, I have the Vivo X50 Pro, which is the crazy gimbal phone, and it's a 90 hertz refresh, and it has an adaptive mode, which I turned off. I forced it to 90 because it has a 90 option and a 60 option and an adaptive. And I'm thinking of maybe switching to adaptive because, I mean, unless they don't do it as well as Samsung does it so well that you don't really notice.
Exactly. Yeah, I was hoping to hear somebody else's input on that because I'm not finding that I noticed that difference by them.
Supposedly it can go down to 10 hertz.
Right.
When like nothing's moving on the screen and you're not touching the phone.
Right.
And obviously you don't need to refresh it more than 10 times a second at that point, right? But as soon as you're scrolling, you want this to be buttery smooth. Right. And it's delivering on that. Look, I think the Ultra is really the ultra-est hardware that's like the Note 20. And again, it goes back to the S20 Ultra. I have a review in it too, and I was just like, I never got into it. Like it just looks it looks like somebody, if you ask like a graphic designer, please draw a generic phone for our marketing material.
Right.
Other than the camera bump on the S20 Ultra, which is pretty impressively big because of its spec, like they would draw an S20 or S20 Plus. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And the S20 Ultra follows that design language, and because of that, to me, it just doesn't feel right. You know?
And it was kind of an odd lineup anyway to have an S device like that. I mean, the S devices are really more of the mass market consumer type device, and it seems like the S20 Ultra went a bit too far, right? They could have had the S20, the S20 Plus, and then went to the Note 20 and Note 20 Ultra, I think, without even having that S20 Ultra.
I mean, in a way, I'm glad they did because they were able to improve the camera,
Yeah, exactly.
And so now we have a really I think that it's really short of course, the Z Fold 2, which is coming. Right. I think this is the flagship. This is it. Like, I just love the look too, like the squarish, that's a really square design of the Note. Absolutely. I'm not a big fan of the waterfall screen, but it's, I'm used to it now with Samsung, and this isn't too pronounced and it's manageable. But I feel like if they could do that with a flat screen, and you know how the corners are not super rounded on the screen, on the actual pixels of the screen? Like, give us a phone in that square chassis with no waterfall and still super slim side bezels and the very, very small radius corners that we have in, the Note today. But give that to us like next year, and that would be the perfect design. And so I think it looks really great. I love the matte finish as well. We can also talk about the Note 20 and the plastic finish and the 60 hertz display. And that phone doesn't make sense. I've been saying that for 3 episodes now.
No,
but
it doesn't. Yeah.
I think it's a gateway,
I think that, I'm also not a huge fan of the waterfall display. Sometimes I have the accidental presses if I have too many fingers on there, but the width of the Note 20 Ultra helps kind of dampen that. But I agree on the Note 20. I don't quite understand that device. It offers just too many compromises, in my opinion, for the price.
I mean, I think it's a I said the first time after the Unpacked event, the week of that recording, that podcast, I said they're trolling us. Like it's literally let them seeing, let's see what we can get away with, right? But I still feel that way in a way, but I do feel actually more now that it's a gateway product. It's like you look at the Note 20 and you're like, man, I might as well spend $300 more and get the Ultra. And I think that's kind of the idea. And we all know Samsung phones, right? Like you can, I don't know exact details, so don't quote me on this, folks, but I believe you can buy a Note 20 Ultra for $700 already. And the way you're doing that is you have to return it in 20 months. Right. Like you actually have to give it back. Right. So, I mean, that's genius. Like for $700, you're not going to keep that phone for more than 2 years.
Especially if you're a Note user, right?
Exactly. And you know what's going to happen? You're just going to sit in a drawer. You're not going to have time to sell it or something.
Right. And the value will drop too far to be able to do it.
So this is glorious. Yeah, and I mean, in the same way as Apple and Samsung both have that kind of subscription-based yearly update thing, I think for the power user, and some carriers have that deal as well, I think that's actually not a bad idea, right? Yeah, right. The problem with the carriers is you carry your devices, and then you get all the bloatware that comes with that. But I feel like for the Notes, you can, if Samsung starts doing this more regularly, I think is going to be great.
Yeah. Real quick on the S Pen, just because that's a
I want to hear your take on that, because I'm not an S Pen user, right? And you're a Note user, so like obviously it's better, but are you happy?
I am extremely happy. So on the Note 10, I barely use the Air Actions. I used them kind of for testing and found them kind of gimmicky. In the 3 weeks I've been using the Note 20 Ultra, I use them almost every single day, and they're much more accurate. And I love that I can dive into. Right now, I think on my device that I have about 12 apps that I can customize the controls with the S Pen. Mm-hmm. So you can go into the S Pen settings and actually customize exactly what that S Pen will do in specific applications. Wow. And I love that ability. And then with that 120 hertz screen refresh rate and the improvements on the S Pen
latency,
performance and latency, I mean, it's just a flawless writing experience. I love it. I'm having a blast.
It's now down to 9 milliseconds, and you feel it. Like I noticed it immediately. It's a lot more like using the Apple Pencil on an iPad Pro right now. Yeah, and that's good news. I feel to me like I haven't even tried the gestures because I'm kind of biased and thinking it's just going to be a disaster.
Because it has been in the past. It's been inconsistent, right? And if the action won't happen all the time or nearly all the time, then who cares? But I in my experiences, I've seen very consistent, reliable behavior this time on the S Pen. So
the thing that delighted me this time using the S Pen, and maybe that was on the Note 10 last year, but I just didn't notice, was that when the phone is off, not off, like on, and not the screen is not on, like your phone is locked, and you pull out the pen, you can scribble on your screen right away. Right. I love that as you hover, it shows you what pen you're about to use. Yeah. Like it shows you the color and thickness of the pen you're about to use right there as you hover with the pen before you actually hit the screen. That's the best use of hover I have seen yet, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny,
it's intuitive.
There's other little software things they added, like the ability to sign PDFs directly now.
I mean, I'm surprised that wasn't in there all this time. Like,
I know, I can't believe it wasn't. That was like a natural thing, but now that's in there, and there's a lot coming. I'm personally a Microsoft Services user at work, so I can't wait for more Microsoft integration. When I can get my Samsung Notes, which is actually a very much improved application, but soon that will sync up to my OneNote, and then then it's perfect for me. Then I'm all set.
There's no doubt to me the Note users should upgrade this year. Yeah, and that this is going to keep them very happy. And but I'm not a Note user, so to me, this could be an S series phone, and I would still feel as amazed and happy with it as I do now. Like what I want to point out to people is that if you are coming from an S series and it's time for you to upgrade, and you're trying to decide between the S20 series phones and the Note 20 series phones, other than the fantastic discounts available on the S20s right now, I would say that if you can afford it, or you could get a good deal from your carrier or something,
right, good trade-in.
Spring for the Note 20 Ultra, because even if you never touch that S Pen once, this is a formidable phone.
Right, absolutely.
And not just because it's big and has all the specs and it's $1,300. Those are formidable things for sure. But I feel that overall, like, this is such a winner of a phone. Like, it's like everything but the kitchen sink. It other than the headphone jack, which, as I said last show, is apparently no longer part of the inventory in the kitchen sink. It's gone forever. But I feel like really they've hit everything, every little detail you can think of. Plus future-proof tech, like the iPhone has this as well, the ultra wideband for file transfers and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I don't know. I feel like performance is incredible. Battery life is good. That's an area that perhaps if you're a really heavy user and you don't care about the S Pen, the S20 Ultra would be better because it has 500 milliamp hour more.
Right.
But most people I've talked to, and you're like my journalist colleagues and stuff, there's a few who have said, it's not good enough for me, the battery. Like, so how do you feel? Because I'm fine with it.
I'm a pretty heavy user, and I work mostly remotely now, but every once in a while I do go into the office in Seattle. I ride the train and all this. So I spend a lot of time on my phone on those days, and I'm able to go a full day with it. So that's kind of, I don't do a lot of battery testing. I just kind of do, here's what I do every day testing.
Right, exactly.
I'm easily able to go the full day.
And that's how I evaluate it as well.
Yeah. Because I do the same things all the time, right? I'm not like
so you have a good point of reference. If you do the same things all the time with the same phones, then you have a really good point of reference. That's the same with me.
One other thing I learned yesterday, since I did take the train in, is I finally was able to test the 5G away from my little local area where I roam right now on this remote work atmosphere. And I was blown away. I'm seeing, Samsung devices always see really good reception, right? But I was seeing 5G performance yesterday on the order of, I think it was 140 megabits per second down.
And this is T-Mobile, right? You're on
T-Mobile, and about 40 up. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I've been testing a lot of 5G phones. I've never seen it this fast on my train route, which is behind cities and in kind of the background areas.
So, I heard from my friends at Hot Hardware, since, I write reviews for them primarily right now. I just happened to do this camera review for my friend Judy at Gear Diary, but the guys at Hot Hardware in their review said that it's using Qualcomm's latest power amplifier for 5G. Like, it's some new chip for the actual PA stage of the 5G, which I think is why we're seeing these improvements. Because I agree with you, having used it both on AT&T and T-Mobile in the same place I've used other 865, X55 phones, the performance is slightly better and overall very impressive. I haven't obviously been able to test it on Verizon ultra wideband because we don't have any of that in the Bay Area right now. But yeah, look, performance is solid, battery life is solid, the camera is fantastic. I suggest you read my review. It'll be in the show notes. It's basically, it's kind of cuts the difference. It splits the difference between the iPhone 11 series and the Pixel 4 series, in the sense that it's almost as good as a Pixel 4 in terms of stills imaging, and I say 4 in general, like that includes the 4A,
right?
Because the 4 obviously has two lenses with the telephoto, but in general, I'm talking like comparing main lenses, right? And then in terms of video, it's almost as good as an iPhone 11, and to me, the iPhone 11 is still the best at recording video,
right?
And the Pixel is still the best at doing stills with the main sensor. And so I feel like unless you're going telephoto, that's where if you go telephoto right now. So it's interesting to me, like maybe we can get into this. I don't know if you noticed this between the S20 Ultra and the Note 20 Ultra, but I feel like the S20 Ultra's periscope 4X zoom lens telephoto was a bit weird. Like it was a kind of a terrible implementation in some ways. I don't know. Terrible is probably exaggerated, but it was like they just missed the mark a lot somehow. Like it just didn't come out that great to me, despite being, very good on paper. Yet this thing, it improves where you really need it most. Like it goes from 4X to 5X optical. So, glass always wins right now. We're still not quite as good at computational to catch up for glass deficiencies. And then the sensor went down from a 48 megapixel to a 12. And even though it's not a great sensor, it's only 1 micron pixels, the f-stop is the lens is much faster. It's a larger aperture, and as a result, it gathers more light. So you lose a little bit in performance on the sensor, but you gain a little performance on the lens and a lot of performance on the actual optics of zooming.
Right.
And the end result, I feel that even at 50x, you side by side, I feel you don't want to ever use photos at 50x, but if you had to, I feel that side by side, the Note 20 Ultra is better than the S20 Ultra by a thin margin. And I think that the P40 Pro Plus that I have from Huawei, which has a native 10x optical, it still beats them.
Yeah.
At 50x, the P40 Pro Plus struggles because it only has an 8 megapixel sensor behind that lens. Okay. So it started like. It has, but it's only going 5x digital because it's got a 10x optical, right? So it's kind of a wash. I feel that you can use any of these 3 phones up to 20x without any issues, like for actual decent photos and results. Exactly. Which is kind of like if we had told each other that 2 years ago, we would have been, you're nuts. That's not possible.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I think 20x is really a nice distance of telephoto support that you're going to get with a good picture. 50, I just do that to kind of mess around, and I look at Mount Rainier. What kind of details can I see?
Sure,
it's more of not necessarily taking a picture, but if I want to see something that's far away, just to kind of see what's there vaguely, that helps. More of like using it almost as binoculars, really, than a
exactly.
Camera,
Absolutely. If you use it that way, it's fantastic. I still think though that now you can take photos at 5x and 10x that are superb, and at 20x that are very usable, and beyond that, it's a binocular, right? But I think that, that's where the iPhone, no matter which one you get, and the Pixels, no matter which one you get, can't even touch it.
Can't do that, right? Yeah.
And so, in that way, that's what I meant when I said it's kind of in between the two. Like it's like a triangle, right? You have like the Notes at one apex, the iPhone 11 at the other, and the Pixel at the other. And the Pixel is the king of main sensor photography, and the iPhone's the queen of video, and then the Note is like the zoom master, right? Like it's kind of amazing.
Can you imagine if Samsung was able to get Google's software in their phones? Oh man.
I think and if they could get Apple's color science and stabilization know-how. Don't get me wrong, it's not like the Note 20 can't take stable video, but there's a certain algorithm that Apple is using to stabilize that video that just feels very natural, and anyone can do digital stabilization today. And of course, these phones also use their optical stabilization in addition to that. But it's like, it's hard to make it look right. Here, another perfect example is we were just talking about a few minutes ago is that Vivo X50 with the gimbal, right? Like I've been testing it and I'm super impressed with the camera system on that overall, every part of the camera. It's got a 5x telephoto, periscope, and it's with an 8 megapixel sensor. It's got a 2x telephoto on top of that, dedicated for portraits. And then it has an ultra wide. And so the sensors are all pretty small, except for that 48 megapixel gimbal suspended main sensor. And you'd think that with the gimbal, it's essentially OIS on steroids. Like the entire sensor and lens are being moved, not just the lens.
Right.
And it has basically can do, instead of 3 degrees of compensation, you can do up to 6 degrees of compensation. Nice. You'd think that it'd be the most stable phone video recording platform, right? But it's not. It's better than most phones, but is it better than an iPhone or a Galaxy Note 20 Ultra? I'm not convinced. In the sense that, it's a bit of a gimmick. I mean, I'm excited in the sense that they're really pushing the envelope in terms of hardware, right? Like this could be refined to be a significant improvement over even an iPhone.
Right.
But it's all in the software and how you take the accelerometer inputs and all that, and the what you see, what the camera sees, and you compensate for it to make it look natural. Yeah. Where I think the gimbal system really, really shines is if you're doing a still and you're holding that phone. You can literally, like, it's crazy, man. You can literally start moving the phone like half or quarter of an inch left and right, and nothing happens.
Nice.
And you're like, whoa. Like, that's when you do small motion, like, it's amazing.
Right.
When you start being really jerky, it's got a really hard time keeping up because it's a feedback loop, right? And it's got these little coil motors in there, and they can't keep up, right? Also because of the inertia of the whole thing, right? So interesting. But yeah, overall, I think, we've talked about display, battery life, the display. We haven't talked much about it, but other than the waterfall, man, that screen and the refresh, that screen is just insanely good, right? Super bright, super high quality colors. I don't know how they do it, Samsung. It's just like every year.
I had to immediately go out and buy a kickstand case just because on my train, I just like to watch videos on the display.
I know, awesome. 6.9 inches. It's basically like having remember the Nexus 7? That's basically like what you have in your pocket now.
That's right.
Crazy.
7-inch tablet.
It's amazing. Let's see. We talked about battery life, performance camera. Anything else that stand out? I mean, it's got wireless charging, all that good stuff. The S Pen. I don't know. It's pretty packed. Oh, stereo speakers. What do you think?
I haven't used that much, actually.
Yeah, neither have I. I mean, they sound all right to me, but. And then I'm a little annoyed with the pricing. Obviously, it's pretty expensive. I mean, don't get me wrong.
It is, but the thing is, at the launch, there's so many offers.
I know.
and they're actually giving you, I mean, you can find some old phone in the drawer and get like $400 for it. I mean, I know it's expensive, but if you buy it in the first month or so, you don't pay, don't pay full price. I mean, find some way.
For sure. And then wait a little bit and it's going to come down again.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's hard to say this because I am very conflicted about any phone that costs more than $1,000 right now. But I still think this phone is worth the $1,300. It has everything and it does it so well.
And some future-proof stuff. So, I mean.
At the same time, though, it's just like, oh, man. Also, 128 gigs as a starting point for $1,300. Look, I'm totally 100% happy with 128 as. Like, I mean, come on, like the Pixel 4a for $350 has 128 gigs. Like that's what it should have, and it does, and it's fantastic for it. But for a Note at $1,300,
I know. Yeah, especially the Note. That is your power user. Samsung start at 256. 256,
and they don't have a 256 option.
No, they don't. They just jump right to 512.
Exactly, and then you really have to pay $150 more for it. So. It's a tough. The pricing is, and then of course you get the Note 20 in there. That's like, it's just overpriced what it is. It should be $800.
The only thing I like about the Note 20 is I'm a real fan of that green. I wish there was that.
Oh, that green is lovely. Absolutely. And I do think that it has most of the industrial design. It's a little more rounded though. I don't understand why they didn't do what I suggested earlier, which is like flat screen.
Yeah.
Small radius corners and keep that squareness of the chassis. Even if you don't have the waterfall, it would have been more in line with the aesthetic because it feels kind of like a hybrid between an S20 design and the Note 20 Ultra, you know what I'm saying? Whereas last year, the Note 10 and the Note 10 Plus were like,
the same thing.
Exactly like, it's like somebody scaled, like had the little dial next to them and like, scale it up by 20%, And that's not the case this year. And of course, then the plastic back, I think it's just insulting at that price. I don't have any issue per se with the plastic bag.
Yeah, right.
And also, I don't like it when manufacturers use plastic to replicate real materials. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're going to use plastic, just be real about it. Like, make it look like plastic. Don't try to cheat about it. Don't say, ooh, it's glass, but it's plastic.
Or whatever.
Or it's like the OnePlus Nord. The chassis is not metal, but it looks like metal. Why did you have to make it look like metal?
And I have no problem with plastic. I mean, most of our phones in the past were plastic. Which
I know,
is perfectly
it's fine.
And,
it's just the intent.
It'll survive a drop a little bit better, all that. But knock it down a little bit in price.
It's just the intent and the price point. And then, of course, the biggest stumble, in my opinion, on the Note 20 is that 60 hertz display. Like, seriously, $1,000 phone. Like, you just pulled a LG V60 mess up here but that's $699. Like, so like you can kind of get away. LG can kind of get away with it, even though they totally got panned on it. Right. Let's move on to the Surface Duo a little bit, because I feel like I didn't give it any attention last week. So just for the listeners, the Surface Duo was announced the day we recorded the podcast, and because we did it on a Wednesday last week, so it was early on in the week, and I just didn't have time to squeeze it in the topics, and I figured that after the reaction settled, it'd be better to talk about it now. And I know that you talked to Mary Jo recently at ZDNet, Mary Jo Foley, who is a huge Microsoft encyclopedia. She's awesome. And so I'd love to hear your take on the Duo and what the takeaway was from your conversation with her.
Sure. And I think, there was the announcement like you just mentioned, but then I believe it was like 2 or 3 days later. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's about a 35-minute
Oh, yes,
video.
I have.
Everybody should watch that too, because I'm telling you, okay, so Mary Jo and I are talking, she's a Microsoft guru and everything else. As you probably back in the day, we loved Windows Phone and all of the previous Microsoft stuff. And I was, I didn't ever want to give up my Windows Phone. I eventually did. I saw this come, and you'd think it naturally, oh, this guy's a Microsoft fan. He'll buy it for sure. Initially, I was like, no way. It looks kind of nice, but it's got big bezels. I don't know if it's really anything new. The hardware is blah, blah, blah. Well, then I watched that 30-plus minute video, and the light came on. It is really not about the hardware. It's really about the software and what Microsoft's doing for productivity. So I actually pre-ordered one since then. I did right away. At first I was like, no way. What is going on here? Come on. Because if you look at the specs, right? You're like, oh man, Microsoft. I mean, there's some old specs in here. You're not stacking up. We just have the Note 20 released, but you got to look beyond that. You've got to look at the software and what they're trying to do with it. And
I agree 100%. I feel like it's a good fit for you, because you use so many Microsoft apps, right? So,
right, yeah.
But I'm the same way as you. That video really turned me around. I still think the hardware is crap. Like, not okay. It's all relative. Okay,
right.
Like, I appreciate how thin it is. I know there's a lot of engineering that went into that hinge because I'm an engineer. I get it. Like, I appreciate and admire, and I don't want to negate all the effort and work that the team at Microsoft put into that. I want to be clear.
You and I really sync on that because we're both engineers, and we see things like that hinge. We're just like,
and we're right. Exactly. So anybody from Microsoft that's listening right now, I really want you to understand that when I say it's crap, it's not that. It's just that I hate when phones are pre-announced like almost a year early. Mm-hmm. Like in this case was like more than 9 months ago. Like, was it October or something?
I think
it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
10 months ago. And then, the specs are not modern, right? Like 855 is a fine chip.
Yeah.
But it's not like when I see the performance level I get out of a 765 right now.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, do I want an 855 anymore?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Right.
So, it's a tough sell in that sense, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, for me, it's just about like the hardware, the fact that the camera is like 11 megapixels and it's probably going to suck because how do you make a decent camera that's first of all, that number is a weird number.
It's a weird number,
it makes me worry that what the hell kind of sensor are they using?
Right.
And of course you can use it by flipping the phone over and then it's facing the back. But I have a feeling that we're going to be very disappointed with that camera.
Yeah.
And that is a miss. No matter how cool your hardware is, no matter how cool the software is, if you don't want people to carry a Note 20 Ultra alongside your freaking Duo, or an iPhone 11 Pro or 12 Pro this year, Microsoft, you really need, assuming they have an unlimited budget too, because $1,400.
Right.
So I think that's the thing that I'm most annoyed with is it's like, why make such a fuss about it a year ago when you could have just waited until now and maybe you could have released this with an 865 and then of course you would have had to have 5G. So how about a 765G? That would have run perfectly on that.
Yeah.
Like I don't think that device needs an 855.
Yeah. It'll be very interesting to try this thing out. I'm a little worried about how phone calls are handled, with the screens and things like that. But I know a lot of times the people I meet in business do have two phones, right? They've got a work phone and then they've got some other phone. This could be your work phone, right? And then your personal phone, you have, your iPhone or whatever else you have for the camera. This is really, seems to me that they're not, they hardly talked about the camera. The camera to them seems to be a Teams camera more than anything else, right? They're really, really focused on the software and the productivity and the user experiences. And like Mary Jo said in her review, this is really for Surface super fans. And it just so happens, I love the Surface hardware. And I started with the Surface 3. I'm on the Surface Pro 6 now. And I just can't ever give it up because I just love the hardware. So part of me is saying, I think Microsoft probably brought that to the Surface Duo too with their hardware expertise.
Oh yeah. It's going to be fantastic hardware.
It's not going to be a very good consumer phone, as you mentioned. I mean, it doesn't check the boxes that consumers want. They want a fantastic camera. They want all this other stuff.
And this is something that I feel is kind of a stumble. You go into it, you should know that today you cannot compromise. There are 5 pillars, right? Yeah. It's display, battery life, performance, design, software. Okay, they nailed the software. That video is incredible. It really shows what you can do with a dual screen phone.
Right.
All I could think of at the end of that video was, I want that on a Z Fold 2. Right?
We can talk about that too, yeah.
Yeah, well, let's do that in a second. But okay, design, I think it's an interesting design. I wish it has less bezel and all that, but for first gen, I think it's fine.
Looks like 2 iPad minis cooked together.
Camera's going to suck. Battery life, I'm
a little questionable. It's only 3,000 something, right?
And performance is going to be okay. But again, if it's like, the Razr, Snapdragon 730 came out right around the time that, 5G was a thing. And, it's like, why do they keep doing that?
Right.
It's one thing when you're a small startup company like FX Tech, right? And they did that phone with the flip up keyboard, right?
Right.
And they used an old chip because that's all they could get their hands on, and their lead times are so bad compared to like a Samsung or an Apple. But it's Microsoft with the unlimited budget that comes along with it. It's like, or it's Moto with the Razr unlimited budget.
And it seems like this one, if they would have came in at 1,000, then you might have been able to accept
and
that.
And that's the other thing, the price. Yeah. It's a lot.
It's a lot for
when you know you're not going to get that camera experience, and you don't know what the battery life experience is going to be like.
Right.
And no wireless charging. So if you need to top off, you need to get, you need to find a USB-C charger, and that's fine. But is it a fast charger? We don't know. And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of questions right now. It doesn't look like it's going to be water resistant.
Right.
I mean, I can, again, pass on that. But I don't know. It's a tough sell. And you're right. Before I saw that video, it was definitely a no way for me, right?
But I really need, I did buy it. I mean, I did order it. But I really need to test it out to see if it stays
you're not sure
around.
if you're
I'm not sold that like the Note 20 Ultra, if I bought it, yes, that's my device. This one, I'm buying it, I'll try it. I don't know if it's my device yet. I need to really explore it. So,
Yeah. I feel like I can recommend the Note 20 Ultra to anyone, especially if they can find a deal on it or wait a little longer to get a deal on it.
Right. Yeah.
But this thing is just a complete unknown, and it's going to be really interesting to see how Microsoft handles review units and all that stuff, because it's going to speak to me a lot to how confident they are about it.
Well, I think at ZDNet, I think Mary Jo and Ed are getting review units. So.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. So, I'm excited. It's coming September 10th for $1,400. Microsoft Surface Duo. I wanted to share my thoughts. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Speaking of Moto Razr, we just talked about it. I also didn't mention on last week's show something that happened that day, which was that Moto kind of like hinted and leaked a photo of an event or launch or whatever you want to call it for September 9th. And it's unclear what it is, but by deduction, we kind of know what it is. It's got to be the Razr 2 or Razr 5G that's been leaked to death, because everything else from Moto has pretty much come out. Like there is the Edge and the Edge Plus. We're past those now. There is a 5G phone that came out, like an affordable $500 5G phone that came out in Europe.
Yep. I've seen a lot of good feedback on that one.
The Moto G 5G Plus.
Right.
It's a good name. And there is rumors that might be coming to the US. So, what else could it be at this point?
Right.
And so I'm excited about it because I really liked the first time I used the Razr in LA at that event.
Okay.
They were hand-built units and they felt so well put together. But then I haven't played with a retail one, but from everyone else who's done both, was at that LA event and then played with got a review unit later, the mass-produced ones are just not that well made.
That's what I've read. I've never tried one, but I haven't read good things about it.
And as you saw from the some of the problems with people had with screens and stuff, there were a lot of issues. And the fact that, Moto, even before the bad reviews came out, did not want to seed review units to too many people, tells me they kind of knew they weren't going to be able to meet their own standards in terms of build quality,
Because kind of like the first Galaxy Fold too. I mean, that
Exactly.
that was a 24-hour review period.
I think as such, I think the new Razr is something to look forward to, because this could rectify, like they did with the Fold, rectify a lot of the issues. That, because I don't want to count Moto out, and I don't want to count the Razr, even though it's a little gimmicky to resuscitate that brand and make it into a flip phone. I still don't want to count it out, because after using the Z Flip, I finally saw the light. Like, I never got my hands on a Fold because I didn't want to spend the money on it, and Samsung didn't want to send me one. And there were so many compromises. Like, I was like, let's skip that. And then the Z Flip, I bought one because I couldn't get a review in it. I returned it simply because I couldn't justify keeping it. Like, I'm like, this doesn't have 5G, and I know next year's model will. And in fact, they came out with a 5G model like this summer, etc. So I kind of knew that it's not something I wanted to keep long term. But I was glad I was able to try it out. It really convinced me that that foldable phones are a thing, and for some people, they're a good thing.
And there was a lot of excitement around the original Razr when they started to promote it with the advertisements and things. There was a lot of people beyond just the techie people that remembered the Razr, and they saw that, and they really wanted to love it. So I think there is definitely a market for this kind of device. It'll be interesting to see what they come in, if it's the Razr 2, with what kind of price they launch it. I think the 1400 from the first one was just a bit too high.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're going to be able to lower it too much. That might be able to bring to 1100 or 1000. But what I'm hoping is 765G, which has been a great chip on all the phones I've reviewed, including the Velvet, and more importantly, the Nord, OnePlus Nord. And then, let's hope for better cameras, because that's always the bad thing with Moto. Like, the Edge Plus was finally competitive with most of its peers in terms of imaging, but then I reviewed the Edge recently for Geekspin, and they took all the great stuff about the Edge, and instead of scaling it equally down, they kept everything except the camera. Basically, they made the camera that was just barely competitive much worse, to the point where it's worse than a OnePlus Nord, worse than a Pixel 4a. So at that point, and of course, at first they wanted $499 for it because they had a special deal from day one. But now it's $699. At $699, you can buy a OnePlus 8. You can buy an LG V60. Like at that point, it doesn't make any sense to buy the Edge. So it's always cameras that worry me about the Moto phones, and the original Razr. That's another thing. It shipped with an older chip. It shipped with a crappier camera. Than it should have, because it was in development for so long. So this has got to end, and I really hope that this new phone fixes that. So speaking of folding phones, let's quickly touch on the Z Fold 2. Obviously, I've talked about it on the show. We know it's coming. Is it September 1st? I think it is. Something like that.
I think so, about that.
And we don't know the pricing yet. Nobody in the media knows who's getting review units. It's probably going to be very limited, like the Fold and the Z Flip was. But here's the thing. I feel for the first time very confident that Samsung can really deliver on the vision of the original Fold, with no compromises on this new phone.
Yeah, and I purchased the original, not the original, but when they actually re-released it last summer, I purchased that. I kept it for about 4 months. I loved it. I thought it was great. I know there was a huge crease in the middle and all of that, and that the outside display was pretty small. So we're seeing some good improvements in this, but and I probably would have been one of the first to probably want to order the Z Fold 2, but the Surface Duo kind of opened my eyes to what you can do with a dual screen device. And I tried so much to use the Fold when I had it with two apps side by side, but it's really just it's almost like the LG V60. It's really just two apps side by side. There wasn't a lot of interaction between the apps. And when you're talking about the Fold, when it's open, it's a big screen, but two apps side by side is a pretty narrow user experience. And I didn't get as much utility out of it as I was hoping. So unless Samsung offers some new software things, which, Microsoft's showing it can be done, it wouldn't be nice to see Samsung, and as we talked about before the show, LG, focus on some software improvements in the dual screen or the dual app experience. Right now, even though I was a huge Fold fan, probably not going to get a Z Fold 2 unless I see Samsung doing some more with that display when you open it up.
No, and I hear you, especially since you just spent money, or you're about to spend money on the Duo, because I don't think they take your money until it ships.
Right.
But the point is that, I get it, and I feel the same way, but I'm still more excited about the Z Fold 2 simply because it is wider.
Yes.
So it should be able to accommodate 2 apps side by side. So from a hardware perspective, it fixes a lot of the issues from last year, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. That outside display
the bigger
is just like
front
a
screen
regular
and
phone.
all that stuff.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
But I feel like software is going to be the key. And that is a little bit what I'm worried about because, I think One UI has been an okay experience.
Yeah.
It's been a much better experience than previous stuff on Samsung. But I'm still so much happier on a Moto, on a OnePlus, on a Pixel. Oh my God, my daily is a OnePlus 8 Pro. And once you use that for a while, like you just don't want to go back to non-stock, which is worrying me about Oxygen OS because the Oxygen OS 11 is supposedly to be a little bit heavier handed in terms of skinning.
Yeah, I saw something.
And they're trying to find their, brand now that they're in the big leagues. And I'm a little worried about that. But as long as I can keep it snappy and relatively clean, I think I'm going to be all right. But that brings us to something else, that we're talking about a lot of productivity devices on this show. It's like the Note, then we've got, the Duo.
Well, I do write for ZDNet, so I know.
But I'm just saying, like, it's kind of the perfect time that I had you on. But I'm just saying it's interesting that the other thing that happened this week was that BlackBerry is coming back. Like this was the weirdest PR experience I had. I got this email with the most cryptic subject line, and I was literally hovering above the delete button. When I read it a second time, and I was, wait a minute, they're actually talking about a smartphone with a hardware keyboard and 5G. Oh, I shouldn't delete this. I should reply and say, yes, I'm interested and I agree to the embargo. And then they did it the night before the embargo lifted. Like, it was in the evening Pacific time and I got that email. I'm not sure it's because they did a second round of people at the last minute because, I'm not like, it's not like I'm an Engadget anymore where everybody wants my attention. But it's interesting because once I responded, they were very responsive and they gave me all the spiel and actually set up a briefing with me at like 10 p.m. Eastern time, like 7 p.m. Pacific, like just on the spot with the CEO and founder. And I asked him a lot of hard questions and he was very polite and friendly. He's a nice guy. I think he can't tell me anything because they're really keeping the cards close to their chest right now. But basically, here's the thing. There's this company called Onward Mobility, and they're a startup based in Texas. And they acquired the BlackBerry hardware, like mobile phone license from BlackBerry, the company. For those of you who don't know this, BlackBerry has always been around. Like they stopped making phones, but they're like sell security software to mobile and enterprise customers. So they've been around, they haven't disappeared. And then they've licensed their name to third parties for hardware. And so the first licensee was TCL, which gave us the Key 1 and Key 2, which were great phones, but had, needed to be mid-rangers, yet there were no chips at the time to really make a mid-ranger fly. And we have that today with the 765G, which is why I'm excited. And then they also licensed to a company in India that is making some BlackBerry branded phones for India only. Can't remember the name of the company that does that. And then TCL gave up that license recently. And then this company, Onward Mobility, picked up the license. And they're promising that they're going to give us a BlackBerry branded portrait keyboard, hardware keyboard phone with 5G, which is going to be both for consumers and enterprise, which is going to be, they didn't say this is what I'm implying from my discussion with them. This is going to be, I think, a 765G premium mid-range phone. So in the same sense as the Key 1 and Key 2 weren't flagships for their time. But that to me doesn't mean too much because based on my experience with the 765G, if the cameras are okay on that phone, I think it's going to be perfectly solid as a mid-ranger,
Absolutely. And the interesting thing now, is don't focus on the name. If some people will say, "Oh, another BlackBerry." I don't know about this, but look at where we're at in today's smartphone world. Right, we've got so many different new form factors, ways to use foldables, all this other kind of thing. I'm interested to see how they come out with this keyboard. Right, could it be what was it? Was it the Priv that slid up?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they slide it up. How can they do it without compromising too much of the screen? I mean, there's a lot of options nowadays for them to come out with something that could be very interesting. And, you know, I was a physical keyboard guy for a long time. I've moved on. They've gotten so good with the software.
Oh,
But
yeah,
if you come out with a nice keyboard and don't compromise the screen too much, I'll consider it, you know. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what they're going to come out with, you know. And it's also interesting. Are they going to have these other BlackBerry security elements that were also in the TCL phones, which was a big thing for enterprise people too, you know?
Yeah, so from my briefing, they're basically building this from the ground up, from everything. They're partnering with FIH, which is a Foxconn subsidiary in Hong Kong. So they're from the ground up, from actually the manufacturing process up, the hardware is going to be secure.
Okay.
So they can guarantee that there's no like chips in there that were put in by the factory at the last minute that could spy on you or something like that. So there's a big focus on security and the BlackBerry software experience delivering on this hardware that they're working on. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm excited about it, and but I'm also excited. The non-productivity device of this week, the under-display camera. This is not the first time we've seen this. Oppo and Vivo have shown, and Xiaomi, I should say BBK Group and Xiaomi have both shown prototypes of phones with under-display cameras. But the rumors is that ZTE is coming out with an Axon 25G, that's the name of the phone, in China, which will be the first production phone, supposedly, with an under-display camera. So, I mean, I like my screen real estate. You know, I don't want a hole or a notch. So if this can be something that starts off kind of meh, but builds into something usable in a year or two generations, I'm on board.
So just to clarify what we're talking about here, an under display camera. So there's not a notch, there's not a hole, there's not, you would be able to see the display. And then when the camera comes on, that certain area of the display goes black or and lights up or whatever. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Because I don't use my front-facing camera that much, so to me, you know, do away with it.
That is the challenges so far, from what I hear, is that, as you've probably seen from a lot of the punch hole camera phones, the f-stop on those lenses is pretty poor. Like the apertures are small, f over 2.2, 2.4, and so they, you know, being in the display with a notch or hole adds enough layers of glass there that it you know, reduces the ability to gather light.
Right.
So, and then you combine that with a small sensor, and not as good of a sensor as the back sensor, and you get some compromises. So that's always been the challenge. So now you're actually adding another layer on top of that of pixels, right? So now you can black out the pixels, and they're close enough to the lens that they can be out of focus, and you can have software compensation for that layer of, you know, invisible pixels.
Right.
But the f-stop on these are going to be, and the low light performance on these are going to be the big challenge, right? So, and also the color science, because the OLED on top of it is not perfectly transparent.
Right.
It adds a kind of, you know, contaminates the color in a way as well. Right. So can they recover the color science to make our skin tones look natural, which obviously for selfies is kind of like the most important thing, and then make everything else look right, you know. And they already have enough for a hard time on Chinese phones to master that. Like, I'm not being mean here. I'm just saying, like, you know, like Google's mastered it, Apple has, Samsung's finally getting there, Huawei's finally getting there with Leica. But, like, you know, OnePlus is doing a pretty good job, BBK Group in general, like that Vivo gimbal phone's pretty solid. But I still think you can tell they're not quite there in terms of like matching the color between all the lenses, etc. And so it's a challenge. You know?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It's nice to see innovations like this come about. And ZTE does a good job with I've been very happy with their products in the past, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I feel the same. Last thing I want to touch on really briefly, because this could be an entire podcast of its own. And another thing that happened right around the time I recorded the show last week, which was the whole Epic suing Apple and Google about Fortnite in the App Store. It's a very complicated topic. As somebody who worked in video games for 20 years, I'm kind of seeing both sides here. I think that, you know, Epic is being a little strong-handed, and Apple and Google have always been a little strong-handed on the App Store. And my takeaway in general here is that no matter what the outcome is here, this is necessary because app stores, like the future of mobile is no longer just apps that you download and install and are insular and are binaries that are controlled by, Apple or Google. And that's important because we need that. We need the curation.
Right.
We need the content to be quality. And more importantly, we need the security aspects. And I totally understand that and agree with that. However, that's not the future of apps. Apps are going to be dynamic in the future in the sense that they will evolve. Like you will be able to start with a free app and then you want to get the paid version. Right now you can do that.
Right.
In app, you can hit a button and then you have a license.
Right.
But imagine going way further than that, where code actually gets added to the app you're running right now in real time. Like it's a game. Imagine it's a game that spans the entire world. You don't want to download 40 gigabytes to your phone from the App Store that contains the entire universe. You just want to be able to roam the universe, and over 5G, the universe gets streamed to you. The textures, the models, the sounds, and the code related to that area of the world could be streamed. Now, how does an App Store handle that?
Yeah, right.
They can't handle that code because it can't be reviewed. Because it could change. And it's exactly what Epic proved. They said, look, we added some server code to our servers for Fortnite, and all of a sudden there's an in-app purchase option.
Right.
We didn't change the binary in any way, proving that Apple's model and Google's model don't really work.
Right.
Like if you can't, clearly the security is not up for it, right? Like you can break it that way. So of course they got booted and then they sued.
Right.
Epic got booted from both app stores and got sued for adding that feature because Apple's saying, well, we want to make our 30% cut on this stuff. And so I'm a little worried that Apple is not really seeing that they need to accommodate this kind of upcoming model and find a reasonable way to make a profit on it so that it might not have to be 30%, right?
But I like what you said. I mean, you're looking ahead, and I really think I'm glad that Epic is at least a company with a lot behind it to stand up here and challenge the way that they, the app stores and the Google Play Store were established. I mean, these were established, a decade ago now? And they're still using that same model. It's time, like you said, with 5G and with the devices and the servers and all this stuff, it's time to take a reevaluation. And it would be nice if Apple and Google would just say, yeah, let's take another look at this stuff and see what the better way is to make everybody happy,
And I think it's going to happen.
Yeah,
this is the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, Microsoft has xCloud coming. Stadia is a different thing because you're actually streaming like a game that's actually playing on a remote server. And that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the game is running on your device, but it's getting new actual binary code sent to it in chunks. And assets, content like video and graphics and sound sent to it. And levels and stuff in real time. That's already happening.
Right.
And that's not, Apple doesn't have an issue with that. It's the code side they have an issue with.
Right.
Because they're like security and they don't understand. Like even when I worked in video games 10, 20 years ago, we used to have self-modifying code running on hard stuff. That's one of the clever tricks as a developer you can use. Back then, it was a lot easier because there weren't as much hacking and security issues.
Right.
And I understand that the security issues are serious here. The repercussion needs to be explored. But sandboxed apps today, like when you run an app especially on iOS, it's living in its own universe. It cannot see the other apps.
Right.
Like it's very compartmentalized. And I think that it should be possible. From an engineering point of view, I know it can be done. That we can make this happen and work. I think the biggest challenge here is who pays for what and how, right? Because this 30% cut that both Google and Apple are grabbing from the App Store, from whether it's in-app purchases or apps themselves or whatever it might be, is I think kind of broken. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't make 30%. I mean, that's a debatable thing. I think it should be less personally, but I feel like they need to accommodate some way for Epic and others, especially gaming is going to push this really hard. I really don't think like when you look at how VR is supposed to be working, you put your VR headset on and all of a sudden you just navigate a virtual world. Well, this virtual world, where does thing begin and end? It's no longer a model of like you have a screen and then you swap one app in and you swap an app out and you put another app in and you put another app out. No, you're just turning your head around, right? And you're looking at things and all of a sudden the universe needs to basically change in real time to accommodate that. Right. You can't just have the player pause there and go like, oh, you need to go to the App Store now and download this part of the app. Like people are like, screw you. Like you're breaking our VR experience. Right. That's just one example of how this model would be broken. So if Epic were to make a VR game that complex and you couldn't in real time add stuff to the game, how does that work? Right? Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, so that's it, folks. I mean, we could talk about the Pixel 5 leaks. There's a whole bunch of that going on, but it's just, at this point, we kind of know what's coming. It's like, we all hoping that Google's gonna do the right thing and give us a better battery and a third lens with an ultra wide, capability and all the things you need, but it's very possible that Google is going to just Google it like they always do. Google be Google and does their own thing. After the success that's the Pixel 4a, frankly, I don't really care. Like I can point at that phone right now for most people and say, you want a solid Android phone that is going to make you happy every day? There it is, $350 done.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, listen, Matt, do you want to tell folks where on the internet they can find you at all the various handles and publications?
I'm on ZDNet. I have 2 blogs there, smartphones and cell phones, and the mobile gadgeteer. And then on Twitter at Palm Solo.
Yes. Do you want to tell folks? Because, I mean, we're old now. Like the young ones don't know what you're talking about when you say Palm Solo.
When I say Palm Solo, so I started using Palm devices, Palm OS PDAs in 1997, and I was a huge fan of Palm. And if you look in my home office, I'm also a massive Han Solo fan. So I combined the two, and I did this back in probably 98 when I started going online and interacting with people in communities and discussion forums. I created the Palm Solo, and it's been my name. A lot of people actually only know me as Palm Solo. They're like, oh, that's who.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, it's a super awesome handle. So now folks, because I'm not sure everybody knew that. I think the Han Solo reference, I think most people get it.
Right, yeah.
It's just the Palm side, right? Like we all forgot about Palm and what Palm was. Palm was a huge thing, like BlackBerry and Nokia once.
Absolutely.
And now they just make a tiny phone.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, folks, you know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tankgirl. That's TNKGRL, like the comic book character, but you drop the vowels. That's my Twitter handle. It's also my Instagram handle. If you want to discuss the podcast with me, the best probably way to do that is to go to Twitter and chat with me. And then Instagram is where I have photos of the phones that I'm reviewing, photos taken with the phones I'm reviewing. So check that out as well. Some eye candy to go along with the podcast. As the podcast is currently audio only, there is also video content on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast, all spelt out. There's unboxings there, some reviews, some hands-ons. Check it out. It's nice little eye candy and visuals that go alongside the podcast. I want to ask, if you subscribe to the show, that you consider rating the podcast or reviewing the podcast. Some platforms actually support that, and if you can, that would help. So where can you find us? Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, a bunch of other places. And if you're kind of old school and you want an RSS feed and add it to your good old RSS reader or RSS podcast catcher or whatever it's called, then mobiletechpodcast.com is the URL. And of course, there's links there to join through the various platforms for podcasting as well. So mobiletechpodcast.com for RSS. And finally, I want to say that there is a donate link in the show notes. If you can help, that would be great. I do this as a labor of love, and to sustain it, I can definitely use your help. It's a PayPal link in the show notes, so check that out. And I want to thank Audible, our sponsor. They've been with us forever, and they're such a great platform. If you love books, as much as I do, but you're not always in a place where you can maybe read the book because you're driving, or like, my perfect example that I use every week is like, you're working for FedEx, you're driving a delivery van. How many podcasts can you listen to in one day? Like, you probably want to listen to some long form content, and that's where audiobooks and Audible come into play. And so, consider joining Audible with the link in the show notes. It's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. You get a deal and you help the podcast. It's a two-way street. So the deal is 30-day free trial. You get to keep a book at the end. And, they have a ton of selection. Like, their books are often read by the authors. Is one of my favorite things. This is a really great platform. So consider joining, and in exchange, it helps the podcast. It helps me, and it helps me do this every week. And I want to thank Audible for being with us since the early days and being a sponsor of the show. And I also want to thank you, Matt, for being on the show yet again.
Yeah, thanks, Miriam. I really appreciate it. This is a great one. This is all my lovely topics.
I know. It sometimes doesn't fit perfectly, but I think like
perfect storm.
It was all productivity and enterprise.
There we go.
It was a good time. Yeah, for sure. I'll definitely have you on again, Matt. Thanks for being here. And folks, I'll do another show next week, so please stay tuned for that. And until then, cheers, everybody.
Bye.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.